Case of Alan Wade. High school sweethearts James Reggie Sooner and Carol Alford came from Charleston, South Carolina. They had grown up side by side, attending the same school, in the same grade, and had known each other since childhood. As time passed, their friendship gradually developed into something deeper. By 1959, at the age of 15, they had begun dating. Friends frequently commented on how harmonious and lovely James and Carol appeared together. They preserved those memories in photographs, young and joyful, filled with dreams of a long and happy life ahead. It was their first profound connection. The couple became nearly inseparable, both at school and outside of it. They seriously considered marriage once they reached 18, a choice encouraged by their parents. However, life had different plans. In 1962, shortly after finishing high school, James was drafted into military service. He and Carol chose to postpone their wedding until he returned and promised to exchange letters regularly. Time continued to pass, and the separation grew longer. By the mid-1960s, James found himself deployed to Vietnam, a dangerous hotspot, and all contact was lost afterward. Carol had no word whether her beloved was even alive. She faced significant difficulties in her life beginning when he stopped writing to her. She decided to continue her education while at the same time securing employment at the Charleston Air Force Base. Eventually, Carol married, but this first marriage ended quickly and produced no children. In 1975, she entered into a second marriage with Richard Alford, and in 1977 they welcomed a daughter named Rhonda. Unfortunately, the second marriage also proved unsuccessful because of Richard's excessive drinking and physical abuse. By the mid-1980s, Carol could no longer tolerate the continuing abuse. She took her daughter with her and filed for divorce. However, Richard continued to harass and relentlessly pursue her. In 1987, his behavior reached a critical stage. Richard bought a handgun, drank a large amount of alcohol, and went to confront Carol. On that fateful day, Richard rang Carol's doorbell. She unsuspectingly opened the door while Rhonda was standing in the room behind her. Despite his daughter's presence, Richard pulled out his gun and shot Carol multiple times in front of Rhonda. He then left the scene, drove to a deserted location, and committed suicide by shooting himself. Carol was fortunate to survive because neighbors heard the gunshots and Rhonda's desperate cries for help. They quickly called an ambulance and notified the police. Carol was in critical condition after losing a significant amount of blood. She underwent numerous complicated surgeries and blood transfusions over several days before beginning her recovery. Although she slowly regained strength, she became permanently blind in her right eye and disabled for the rest of her life. Toward the late 1990s, Carol's health once again deteriorated seriously. She experienced severe weight loss along with constant pain and weakness, which led to a thorough medical examination at the hospital. Despite enduring these substantial physical and emotional hardships throughout her life, Carol's resilience continued to shine as she faced each challenge placed before her. In 1987, she received a distressing diagnosis of liver cancer. During her treatment, she was accidentally infected with the hepatitis C virus, which remained undetected and untreated. The virus silently damaged her liver over the years and ultimately led to cancer. However, with proper treatment and supportive therapy, Carol's condition was stabilized. She was required to take her prescribed medications every day for the rest of her life and undergo regular medical checkups to make the necessary adjustments to her treatment plan. Carol faced additional difficulties after losing her job at the Air Force Base because of the severe gunshot wounds. With the added burden of cancer, she was no longer able to carry out physically demanding tasks or remain on her feet for long periods. As a result, she accepted a position as a call center operator for a cable TV company in Charleston, her hometown. Meanwhile, James experienced his own hardships in Vietnam. He was badly wounded during the war and nearly lost his leg, which required a long stay in the hospital. His name was mistakenly included on lists of the deceased, causing even his relatives to believe he had died. Fortunately, he survived and eventually returned home years later. By that time, he had lost contact with Carol. She had moved to another residence, married, and believed that James had died in the conflict. Although James later married, the severe injuries he suffered during the war led to diabetes and several chronic conditions that prevented him from becoming a father. His marriage ended after a few years, leaving him living alone from that point onward. He found work as a laborer on the local railroad, but he expected no more pleasant surprises from life. In the fall of 2000, while Carol was carrying out her duties at the call center, answering phones and offering customer advice, she encountered another caller whose voice sounded strikingly familiar. The voice triggered an emotional reaction within her that she could not ignore. Carol immediately recognized her first high school love, yet she hesitated to act because she believed James was dead. She answered all the customers' questions and then suddenly addressed him by his full name. Silence lingered in the air for a moment. The man timidly asked how she knew his name. Carol began to cry and replied that she was the girl he had dated in high school, the girl he once wanted to marry. For the next several minutes, they both wept into the phone, unable to find words to speak. They soon learned that they still lived in their hometown and arranged to meet the following evening. When they reunited after 38 years, according to Rhonda's recollection, her mother returned home from work that day, looking excited like a schoolgirl and speaking nonstop about James. The next day, Carol prepared carefully for the date, trying on dresses and doing her hair and makeup. She realized she was no longer the young beauty James remembered, but wanted to look her best and capture his heart again. Their reunion was filled with emotion. They had not seen each other in 38 years. They spoke endlessly about everything: the highlights and sorrows of their lives, failed marriages, work challenges, and health struggles. They reminisced about the joyful times they had shared. Their old feelings rekindled, and James and Carol were eager to make up for lost time. They began seeing each other every day and, just a few weeks later, decided to live together. 5 months afterward, they married, and Carol moved into her new husband's home in the Riverland Terrace neighborhood. Family life brought both joys and challenges. The couple initially lived in their native Charleston, South Carolina. In love and happy, they engaged in everyday activities and cared deeply for each other, especially as both faced aging and health concerns. Next door lived the Cole family, longtime acquaintances of James. Stephen Cole had also served in Vietnam, where he had been severely wounded and now relied on a wheelchair. His wife, Natalie, was frequently absent due to work and preferred socializing with friends rather than spending time at home. Their daughter Tiffany would often hang around the streets, with little to do and no money even for small personal expenses. When James and Carol first moved in together, Tiffany was still in high school. Kind-hearted Carol immediately felt a connection with the girl. She genuinely sympathized with Tiffany, who seemed neglected by her own mother. Over 5 years, Carol did everything possible to support her. She invited Tiffany to family lunches and dinners where delicious food was served, occasionally bought her clothing, and even gave small amounts of money for minor needs. Carol treated Tiffany as if she were her own daughter, surrounding her with care and attention. During one summer, the Sumners decided to sell their Chevrolet Lumina minivan. Tiffany expressed interest in buying it through installments, as she had no money but urgently needed a car. The couple agreed to sell it to her at a very low price and divided the payment into manageable amounts over the course of a full year. Early in 2005, the Sumners decided to relocate to Florida due to serious health issues affecting both spouses. Doctors had advised them to move south near the ocean for better conditions. By that time, both were retired, so they chose to make this significant life change. Carol and James sold their spacious Charleston home and purchased property in Jacksonville, Florida, the state's largest city, where they also bought a new Lincoln Town car. The couple was extremely happy and settled into their new home while making plans for their future together. Every day, Carol called her adult daughter, Rhonda, sharing everything about her life, including her thoughts and plans. When communication suddenly stopped, Rhonda was surprised and deeply worried. In June 2005, Rhonda became concerned when her mother failed to call as usual and did not answer her calls either. Initially, she dismissed negative thoughts and hoped everything was fine with her mother and stepfather, expecting them to get in touch soon. However, the following day brought no change. Rhonda called both her mother's and James' cell phones every half hour, but neither was reachable, and voicemail messages went unanswered. On the third day, she decided it was time to act. She chose to drive to another state to personally check if her mother and stepfather were safe. She began early in the morning for a 5-hour drive to reach the Sumners' home. Upon arrival, the first thing she noticed was that their car was missing, which seemed unusual. Approaching the front door, she found it slightly ajar. Inside, the house was eerily silent. despite a light being on in one of the rooms while sunlight streamed in from outside. Rhonda called loudly for her mother and James, but received no response. Entering the kitchen, she saw a table set for two with food that appeared untouched for at least 3 days, as though they had intended to have dinner but left it abruptly unfinished. The house itself was in disarray, with items scattered randomly and some doors and cupboards open, as if someone had frantically searched through them. Rhonda's concern intensified when she spotted essential medications on a bedside table in their bedroom. Her mother's cancer pills, taken 3 times daily, and James' insulin, administered hourly, remained untouched, along with completely dead phones. Given these observations, the medications left behind and the lack of cell phone activity, it was clear that her mother and stepfather could not have gone far or been away for long without these essentials. Understanding the seriousness of the situation, Rhonda immediately contacted the police to report their disappearance under what appeared to be strange circumstances. The couple's vehicle was quickly added to the wanted list. All bank cards belonging to Carol and James were blocked on the very same day. The initial days of the search produced no significant leads. It was impossible to locate either the missing couple themselves or any witnesses. However, on June 12th, several events occurred simultaneously, allowing the police to begin tracing the perpetrators. First, a man called one of the banks, identifying himself as Mr. James Sooner, and complained that his card had been blocked, preventing him from withdrawing cash. Upon verifying the card details, the bank employee immediately sensed something was wrong. The employee suggested that Mr. Sooner personally visit the nearest branch to resolve the issue, but the man abruptly hung up. Minutes later, from the same number, a woman identifying herself as Mrs. Carol Sooner called another bank and reported a similar problem with her card being blocked. When she was asked to appear in person, she refused, citing health reasons and stressing the urgent need for access to her funds. Naturally, this request was denied. Information regarding these calls, along with recordings, was promptly handed over to law enforcement. The same day at the station, these recordings were played for Rhonda, who confidently stated that neither voice belonged to her mother or stepfather. This was immediately evident, as both Carol and James were in their 60s, while the voices sounded much younger. Police quickly hypothesized that these imposters were directly connected to the Sumners' disappearance. They suspected that these individuals had either kidnapped Carol and James, holding them against their will, or possibly killed them after coercing information about their bank accounts and cards. A few days later, the missing couple's car was found abandoned on a deserted road in a wooded area. There were no traces of blood or signs of struggle inside. Experts discovered hair and sweat marks in the trunk that belonged to both spouses. It became clear that the owners had been taken away in the trunk of their own car, and the chances of finding them alive were grim. Examination of the couple's bank transactions revealed that money had been withdrawn from their cards several times after they stopped contacting Rhonda. Reviewing ATM surveillance footage showed a young man, not immediately identified, making the withdrawals. Additionally, authorities traced calls from the number used by the imposters to contact the banks. The SIM card had been purchased with prepaid time shortly before the couple's disappearance, and attempts to identify the buyer initially failed. However, it was discovered that on June 6th, a call from this number had been made to a car rental company. A guest at one of the hotels had rented a Mazda RX-8 under the name Tiffany Cole. This same car was later driven by an unidentified young man who withdrew money from ATMs using the missing couple's cards, $1,000 from one card and nearly $3,000 from another. Using built-in location trackers in the rental car, investigators determined that the Mazda RX-8 had parked at a hotel in Charleston. A capture team was dispatched and forcibly entered the room where the suspects were staying. The room was cluttered with packages and receipts from various stores, including clothes, gadgets, video games, cosmetics, perfumes, and expensive alcohol. Inside were 3 individuals: 23-year-old Tiffany Cole, her 24-year-old boyfriend Michael Jackson, and 19-year-old Alan Lindell Wade. The young men appeared surprised and confused as police placed handcuffs on their wrists. All 3 were taken to the police station and placed in separate rooms for questioning. Initially, they either pretended not to understand the accusations or remained silent. A search of their room uncovered several items belonging to the Sumners, including bank cards, a laptop, some of Carol's jewelry, James' valuable coin collection, keys to their Lincoln Town car, and pawn shop receipts in the name of Cole. Part of the stolen jewelry had been pawned by Tiffany, and the money had been spent with friends. After several hours of interrogation, and upon being presented with irrefutable evidence, Tiffany was the first to speak. She sobbed as she confessed that she and her friends had robbed the elderly couple, but insisted they had done nothing further to them. They had then fled and began spending other people's money. Tiffany also admitted that another accomplice, 19-year-old Bruce Kent Nixon, had been paid $300 for his help. They had never seen him again. Bruce had agreed to participate in the crime for the promised payment and subsequently spent all the money on illegal substances. Finding him was not difficult, as he lived in Charleston and had made no attempt to flee or hide. He was arrested at his parents' home. A careless remark made Bruce realize how serious the consequences could be for his involvement. As a result, he agreed to cooperate with authorities to avoid facing the death penalty. What he revealed was horrifying. It all began in May 2005, when Tiffany went to deliver a payment for a car purchased 6 months earlier from the Sumners. She frequently visited them in person because hospitable Carol and James invited her to stay for a night or a few days, offered delicious meals, and even gave gifts if she brought friends along. There was always space for guests in their home and at their table. On this occasion, Tiffany arrived with her new boyfriend and was warmly invited to dinner. Since it was late, the couple stayed overnight at the Sumners' home. During the meal, the Sumners discussed how they had settled into their new place and inadvertently mentioned that they had nearly $100,000 remaining after selling their Charleston house, implying that they could comfortably enjoy retirement without financial worry. This revelation, made unwittingly by Carol, effectively sealed their fate. Tiffany and Michael exchanged glances that night and began plotting how to obtain the substantial sum while still at the couple's house. In the morning, Tiffany and Michael left and returned to South Carolina. Over the next 2 weeks, they recruited accomplices, assigned roles and responsibilities, and began executing their plan. On June 6th, Tiffany rented an unassuming car while Bruce and Alan stole 4 shovels from an unspecified location. Together, they drove to a secluded area in the suburbs of Jacksonville and began digging a deep hole intended to serve as a grave for the Sumners. On July 8th, Tiffany purchased rope and duct tape from a hardware store and gave the materials to her accomplices. That evening, Bruce and Alan arrived at the couple's home under the pretense of needing assistance and asked to use the phone inside. Despite finding them suspicious, the Sumners allowed them in, believing they genuinely needed help. Once inside, Bruce and Alan immediately attacked Carol and James when he responded to her screams. They bound their hands and feet with duct tape, blindfolded them, and demanded information regarding any money or valuables in the house. Under severe threats of torture and death, the Sumners provided their bank account details and card pins in hopes of being spared. Once the intruders obtained this information, 2 additional accomplices entered the house. They helped drag Carol and James into the backyard and stuffed them into the trunk of their family car. Alan drove the Lincoln with Bruce beside him, while Tiffany and Michael followed in a rented Mazda RX-8 as part of the sinister plan. During the drive, they encountered a police patrol that might have attempted to stop the car containing the couple. The second car was meant to divert attention by speeding or blatantly breaking rules. However, no one appeared in their path, allowing both vehicles to reach their destination safely. In the trunk, James managed to free his arm, removing the duct tape and blindfold from his own face, as well as his wife's to prevent suffocation. There was little else they could do. Their surprise, bewilderment, and shock were immense when the trunk lid opened, revealing among their captors Tiffany and her boyfriend, who had recently visited them. The captives were led several dozen meters through the woods to a prepared grave and simply pushed into it. The couple pleaded desperately for their lives, but the young criminals proceeded without mercy. They killed the couple in a brutal manner by burying them alive. According to Bruce, it took roughly an hour to cover the bound elderly couple with soil while they cried, professed their love for each other, and said their goodbyes. Later examinations confirmed that the spouses had died of suffocation. Soil from the grave was found in their mouths, respiratory tracts, and even stomachs. After committing this horrific act, the perpetrators abandoned the Lincoln in the woods and returned to town in the rented car. They went to the Sumners' house, took valuables, and then returned to South Carolina to begin spending their loot. However, within 2 days, all stolen cards were blocked. 4 days later, all participants in the crime were taken into custody. Bruce Nixon was the only one to fully admit guilt from the outset and agreed to cooperate with investigators in hopes of leniency. He revealed the location of the spouse's grave and detailed everything that occurred on that terrible night. Tiffany claimed that her boyfriend, Michael, had lost control and initiated the crime. Her lawyer argued that Tiffany was merely an accomplice and not directly involved in the murder itself, citing that she became aware of the Sumners' retained money after the house sale. Jackson and Lindell chose to remain silent, though compelling evidence was collected against them. The jury concluded that Tiffany Cole could not be considered innocent, as she had participated in planning the crime, rented a diversionary car, and devised strategies in case they were pursued by police. She also helped dig the grave and pawn stolen items, spending the proceeds with apparent pleasure, as evidenced by numerous photos of her in purchased clothes and even in a limousine rented to celebrate their illicit success. As a result, Bruce Nixon was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, while Jackson, Tiffany, and Lindell received the death penalty. Despite filing multiple appeals and grievances, all were denied, leaving the sentences intact. However, in 2023, 18 years after their heinous crime, the death sentences had still not been carried out. Moving on to the next case. The case of Allison Bonilla. Allison Pamela Bonilla Vazquez was born on November 7, 2001, in Cartago, Costa Rica. She is an only child and lives with her mother, Yendri Vazquez. In addition to her mother, her grandparents, Ramon and Marjorie, and her aunt, Samara, also helped raise Allison. Her father left the family shortly after her birth, choosing to be with another woman who was pregnant, and he did not wish to have a role in Allison's life. Only once, when he was diagnosed with lung cancer, did he request to see his daughter, and Yendri allowed him to. It is worth noting that his second family was unaware of Allison's existence. Allison and her mother, Yendri, shared a particularly close bond. For Allison, Yendri served as both mother and father, and she often gave her mother gifts on Father's Day. Their relationship went beyond the typical mother-daughter connection, with Allison feeling comfortable sharing everything with Yendri without fear of judgment or misunderstanding. Despite not having a father, Allison did not feel lonely or abandoned. She had a large family and enjoyed spending time with them, attending church regularly every Sunday. Relatives described Allison as kind, outgoing, and friendly. In photos, she always appeared happy, showing no signs of sadness or longing in her eyes. Allison had long dreamed of becoming a model. She decided to leave 8th grade to focus on makeup classes, believing that combining the two would be too difficult and not wanting to waste time on anything that would not help her reach her goals. Afterwards, Allison began seeking employment to help her mother pay the bills, but did not receive any responses from the places she applied to, which made her very sad. Her mother, Yendri, realized that Allison would face difficulties finding work due to her limited education, so she encouraged her to attend evening classes. At age 18, Allison enrolled in Liceo Enrique Geyer, a few miles from her home. During this period, she completed a pastry course and began practicing, creating delicious cakes and desserts that were loved by everyone in the neighborhood. This allowed her to find a way to earn money through her baking skills. Allison had a boyfriend named Harold Surisolano, who lived in Cochi, a district in the province of Cartago, Costa Rica. Typically, Allison spent her mornings at home with her mother, then met Harold, and later attended evening school at 6 o'clock, often returning home late by bus. The walk from the bus stop to her house was dangerous, dark, and deserted, so Allison always informed her mother of her location, and sometimes her mother would pick her up at the bus stop or halfway. On March 4, 2020, Allison visited her mother's nail salon and then stopped by a classmate's house for about 15 minutes. They arrived at school at 6 p.m. and parted ways due to having different classes. Allison waited in an empty classroom for approximately 15 minutes before realizing that her classes had been canceled for the day. Instead of going home immediately, she decided to visit her aunt, who lived nearby, but her aunt was not home. Allison then went to her boyfriend Harold's house, where she learned he was at work but would return soon. Harold's mother invited Allison inside to wait. When Harold returned, the family had dinner together, discussing various topics and future plans. After dinner, Harold excused himself for a moment to attend to urgent business, but promised to return shortly. At 8:15 p.m., Allison left Harold's house without waiting for him, setting off a chain of events that would later become nationally known. Harold arrived home about 5 minutes later and, noticing that Allison had left, texted her to ask her location and offered to give her a ride home on his bike. Allison replied immediately that she had already arrived at the bus stop. While waiting for the bus, she messaged her friend Pa to see if Pa's cousin could give her a ride home on his bike. However, Pa's cousin declined because his bike was a special type and unsuitable for carrying two people. It remains unclear why Allison did not ask her boyfriend for assistance. She may have been upset with him or unwilling to trouble him. Allison got off the bus at 8:43 p.m., and her house was approximately a mile away. Feeling anxious and frightened, she texted her mother to pick her up. At 8:45 p.m., Allison messaged both her boyfriend and mother that two suspicious men had exited a car and were following her, prompting her to run home to avoid them. The road Allison was on was dangerous, poorly illuminated and sparsely populated, with only a single security camera that captured a blurry image that could have been Allison. Allison's mother, Yen Dry, went to the bridge half a mile from their home to pick her daughter up, but did not see her. She tried to remain calm, thinking Allison might have returned to the bus stop for safety. However, she did not find her there either. Eventually, she assumed Allison had not noticed her and had gone home alone. When Yendre returned home, she discovered Allison was still missing and immediately called relatives and friends for help in the search. About 30 minutes later, Harold woke up and received a call from his Aunt Samara informing him that Allison was missing. He attempted to contact Yendrai, but was unsuccessful. 3 hours later, Yendrai reported Allison missing to the police, initiating the search. Fortunately, Yendrai possessed the last photograph of Allison in the clothes she had been wearing. Police examined several locations between the bus stop and Allison's house, including Catsey Lake and the nearby hydroelectric dam. On March 5, 2020, they discovered their first clue, Allison's glasses in the grass about a mile from her home. Despite this, Allison appeared to have vanished without a trace. 8 days later, her identification was found at a coffee plantation, which was surprising since the area had been checked multiple times. Even more suspicious was that her ID was placed in a conspicuous, clean spot, as if deliberately positioned to mislead the investigation or conceal something. 15 days after Allison disappeared, Yendre received a call from Allison's father. Rather than expressing concern or offering help, he remarked that Allison was missing because she was too beautiful. Shocked by his insensitive comment, Yendre immediately hung up, unable to believe what she had just heard. For a prolonged period, the family, along with police and volunteers, continued the search. Every Sunday, they posted her picture on posters. One day, they painted messages on the streets tracing Allison's route from the intersection to the bridge where she was thought to have disappeared, in addition to placing posters on roadside poles to catch the attention of passers-by. Meanwhile, the police received a crucial tip. A man reported that he knew Allison and had seen her on the night of her disappearance. According to him, around 8:30 p.m. on March 4th, he had left home on his motorbike to pick someone up and noticed Allison beside a burgundy two-door BMW. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was his cousin's BMW, identifiable by its distinctive bright yellow headlights. Another witness corroborated seeing the same BMW near the location where Allison vanished. The vehicle belonged to 28-year-old Nelson Sanchez Urania, nicknamed Sukia Locos, believed to be a member of a local gang. Nelson and Allison were acquainted because their families had known each other for years and lived in the same neighborhood. According to Allison's mother, they had only interacted a few times, maintaining a typical neighborly relationship rather than a close friendship. On one occasion, Nelson offered Allison and her cousins a ride home, which she accepted, feeling it was morning, she was not alone, and he seemed trustworthy. 2 days before Allison went missing, on March 2, 2020, Nelson contacted her via Facebook, asking her to answer some questions. Following her cousin's advice, Allison agreed. Nelson inquired about her feelings toward him, wanting to know if she liked him. Allison was confused by the sudden question, as they were not close. When she asked why, Nelson clarified he had no negative opinion but wished to know if she thought badly of him. Allison reassured him that everything between them was normal, and Nelson thanked her and said goodbye. Police searched Nelson's home, seizing his car, cell phone, and computer. Investigators discovered disturbing images of women being abused on his phone. Upon inspecting his car, they found it had been thoroughly polished, with the front driver's seat carpet and trunk carpet removed. Hair and blood were found on the trunk lid and sent to a laboratory for analysis. A police dog detected possible blood traces on the 2 front seats and in the trunk. To confirm, investigators conducted a luminol test, which reacts with hemoglobin, revealing multiple blood stains inside the vehicle despite the owner's cleaning efforts. While awaiting the laboratory results, Nelson remained free but was under close police surveillance. Authorities tracked his every movement to ensure he could not leave the city or the country. Although Yendre repeatedly requested his arrest, the police lacked sufficient evidence to detain him. Consequently, Nelson continued to live freely without facing prosecution for several months. Yendre believed that Allison had been kidnapped for ransom. She tried to remain calm, holding on to the hope that her daughter was still alive. Preparing for Allison's possible return, Yendre kept her daughter's room unchanged, refraining from cleaning or rearranging furniture, and even purchased a gift for her. Yendre told the press, "I will continue to do so. As long as there is no evidence that she is dead, I still believe that my daughter is alive and will return home." Laboratory tests confirmed that the hair and blood found in Nelson's car belonged to Allison. The police promptly arrested Nelson. Later, his ex-girlfriend informed authorities that, while Nelson had never physically abused her, he had imposed significant mental pressure on their relationship. Specifically, he forbade her from contacting friends or using the internet, focusing solely on maintaining a sexual relationship with her. Nelson's previous employer described him as highly irresponsible, noting that he had stolen approximately $11,000. Additionally, his landlord stated that an ex-girlfriend ended their relationship because she was exhausted from covering his debts, portraying him as extremely spoiled. Subsequently, Nelson confessed to the crimes committed against Allison. He stated that on the night she disappeared, he saw her walking alone on a deserted road. Taking advantage of the late hour and their acquaintance, he offered her a ride, which she accepted without suspicion. Instead of taking her home, Nelson drove to a remote coffee plantation, forced Allison out of the car, and violently attacked her, dislodging her glasses and leaving her nearly unconscious. He dragged her to an abandoned house nearby, where he raped and brutally beat her. Nelson then bound her hands with cloth and duct tape to the front seat of his car, stuffed her into the trunk, and drove to a dumpster in San Geronimo Cachi, where he pushed her off a cliff into a pile of trash below. He justified his horrific actions by claiming he was under the influence of drugs and admitted that he had long been obsessed with Allison, seizing the opportunity to act on his dark intentions when he saw her that night. Surprisingly, Nelson later recanted his initial confession, accusing the police of coercing him into admitting his crimes. Nevertheless, authorities possessed sufficient evidence to charge him despite his denials. The suspect faced a maximum sentence of 35 years in prison. On the early morning of September 4th, a search party went to the San Ono landfill to search for Allison's body. Due to the area's vast size and difficult accessibility, locating Allison's remains was extremely challenging, especially considering 6 months had passed since her disappearance. Just 25 days after Nelson's confession, the police recovered several critical pieces of evidence, including human bone fragments such as a spine, ribs, part of the pelvis, and a femur. They also found fragments of the clothing Allison had worn on the day she vanished, along with a pair of sneakers with studs inside. All of these items were sent for testing and thorough analysis by the authorities. Jose Francisco Herrera, the suspect's defense attorney, questioned the validity of the evidence, arguing that it had been discovered by volunteers rather than professional police officers. He also pointed out that the discovery of the remains coincided with the period during which his client claimed innocence, which he argued was suspicious. Rodrigo Hura, the attorney representing Allison's family, criticized the suspect's change of testimony, arguing that it undermined the credibility of the official investigation. On October 5, 2020, experts confirmed that the remains discovered belonged to Allison. Since only a partial body was recovered, they could not determine the exact cause of death. However, examination of the remains revealed multiple fractures that appeared post-mortem, suggesting she may have fallen from a considerable height. Her clothes were torn, and her sneakers showed bite marks, indicating a possible animal attack, which would explain why the remains were scattered across different areas of the landfill. Allison's mother, Yendre, expressed fury at the police for failing to act promptly. She believes that had Nelson been arrested sooner, he would have confessed earlier, and Allison's body might have been recovered in better condition. This represents an irreparable loss for the family. Despite her immense pain, Yendri finds some solace in saying, "My daughter is in a better place now, where no one can hurt her anymore." The trial of Nelson began on July 19, 2021. Harold, Allison's boyfriend, served as a key witness. According to his testimony, on the afternoon of March 4, 2020, at approximately 6:30 p.m., he returned home and found Allison with her mother. Harold then left for 5 to 10 minutes, and upon returning, discovered that Allison had left without informing anyone. While she was on her way home, Harold sent her repeated text messages. When Allison got off the bus, she texted Harold saying that 2 men were following her. Concerned for her safety, he suggested she take a taxi, promising to pay for it, but Allison refused twice, insisting she would run home. Harold did not receive further messages from her. He explained that he only informed his mother of the situation, as he did not contact Allison's mother, Yendri, because his phone battery had died. He then slept for approximately 30 minutes. It was Allison's aunt who later called Harold to inform him that his girlfriend was missing. Since that call, he said he had been worried and attempted to contact Allison multiple times, but all calls went to voicemail and WhatsApp messages were unsuccessful. Harold joined the search party for several days, but eventually had to stop because he felt unwell and had work obligations. He expressed regret, saying that if he could go back, he would have taken Allison home that night, though he acknowledged that the events could not be undone. On August 18, 2021, the court sentenced Nelson to 18 years in prison for causing Allison's death. Although he could have received twice that sentence, the judge noted there was no evidence that Nelson had prior knowledge of Allison's route or the time she would be returning home, nor that he had planned the attack. Additionally, the condition of Allison's remains did not provide evidence that he forced her to have sex. The story did not end there. Allison's family was dissatisfied with the original sentence, arguing that it did not reflect the severity of the crime. In 2022, they successfully appealed, prompting a retrial. On September 28, 2023, Nelson was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Allison's family lawyer emphasized that Nelson acted in a cruel and inhumane manner, exploiting the trust of the victim and her relatives. The court ruled that Nelson's actions were intentional and that he used his long-standing relationship with Allison to commit the crime. The criminal court also considered his lack of remorse. Although still grieving and angry, the family found some relief in the new verdict, which brought closure to a painful chapter lasting more than 3 years. Allison's family created a memorial at the site where her body was discovered, placing a cross, flowers, and a small altar with a photo of Allison and a statue of the Virgin Mary. Her case received widespread attention in Costa Rican media and on social media, prompting numerous marches in memory of Allison and other women who have suffered similar acts of violence. Moving on to the next case. The case of Angie Dodge. In the summer of 1996, Angie Dodge worked as a sales clerk at a cosmetics store and had just purchased her first apartment in Idaho Falls, moving out of her mother Carol's house. In her neighborhood, everyone knew one another, and doors were rarely locked. The area was quiet and prosperous. However, Angie had only lived in her new apartment for 3 weeks and could not have anticipated what was about to happen. Angie and her mother had a strained relationship and often argued. Carol believed that her daughter had grown up, wanted to be independent, and no longer needed her control. On Thursday, June 13, 1996, Angie was supposed to go to work at the cosmetics store, but she never arrived. Concerned, a friend went to check on her at her apartment. When he reached the apartment around 11 a.m., he found the door unlocked. After entering, he discovered Angie lying on the floor with multiple injuries and immediately called 911 for help. Police quickly arrived at the crime scene and found no signs of forced entry into the apartment. They also determined that Angie had fought for her life. She had been abused and stabbed multiple times. Her mother, Carol, was devastated by the tragedy that had struck her family. Police were able to collect a semen sample from the attacker, providing DNA evidence. They then began gathering DNA samples from local men and interviewed Angie's friends and acquaintances, including 20-year-old Chris Tapp. Chris initially denied any involvement, but under pressure from police he admitted that he, Angie, and 2 other friends had been in her apartment on the night of the incident. A fight broke out, and one of the men attacked Angie with a knife. During this time, Chris held her down to prevent her from escaping. Chris Tapp was arrested, but throughout the trial he maintained his innocence. He alleged that another man named Mike was responsible for Angie's death. Chris's DNA did not match that of the real attacker. However, on May 28, 1998, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Although Chris Tapp was in custody, Angie Dodge's case remained unsolved because the DNA found at the crime scene did not match him. Police spent time attempting to identify the source of the DNA, but their efforts were unsuccessful and the case gradually faded from attention. Angie's mother, Carol Dodge, was determined to find justice for her daughter and believed that the real culprit was still at large. In 2009, DNA evidence collected from Angie's apartment was submitted to the National Crime Database, but no matches were found. Carol then consulted a DNA expert who advised her about a new technique known as familial DNA searching. This method allows police to search databases of convicted criminals to identify relatives who may share similar DNA. Carol went to the Idaho Falls Police Department and the district attorney's office to report her plan and request police assistance. Officers showed interest in her suggestion. In the summer of 2014, police officer Patrick McKenna searched a public DNA database from a major genealogy company called Genealogy. He discovered that a DNA sample in the database matched 97% of the DNA found at the crime scene. Patrick believed he had identified a relative of the suspect. Police then obtained a search warrant to discover the identity of this relative and later identified him as Michael Usry Jr. in December 2014, more than 18 years after Angie Dodge's death. Police went to Michael's home in New Orleans. They asked whether he had ever been to Idaho Falls, and Michael replied that when he was 19 he had visited Idaho Falls to see friends. Police then obtained a warrant and collected a DNA sample from Michael. He felt uneasy about the situation and asked for a lawyer. Michael searched online for information about the Angie Dodge case, and what he discovered frightened him. He became worried about what the police might do next and began staying home rather than going out. He believed that his phone calls and online activity were being monitored. Although he knew he was innocent and had nothing to do with the case, he began to suspect that his father might be the person who committed the crime. Michael had participated in a genealogy project at their local church, and his DNA appeared in a public database. A genealogy company called Genealogy later purchased the database, which eventually led police to find a match. On January 13, 2015, Michael Usry Jr. received an email with the results of his DNA test confirming that his DNA did not match the criminal, clearing him of all suspicion. The genealogy company, which had lost the trust of its customers because of security issues, then made its database private and no longer accessible to the public. Michael later created a documentary about his experience. Angie's mother, Carol Dodge, later contacted Michael to discuss an important matter. When they met, she asked Michael to write down the names of all his relatives on his father's side. Carol and Michael grew closer when he decided to help her find the criminal who had caused her such grief. He created a family tree on a sheet of paper, revealing that Michael's grandfather had 6 brothers. However, it was also possible that some relatives were illegitimate. By that time, Chris Tapp had been in prison for nearly 20 years when the Angie Dodge case again attracted media attention. Reporters contacted Chris, and after watching a 20-year-old interrogation video, he claimed that his confession was false, stating that police had forced him to confess on camera. Carol, Angie's mother, did not believe that Chris Tapp was responsible for her daughter's death. More than 20 years later, Carol continued working to find the real killer. Mike Heavey, a retired Supreme Court judge, believed that Chris was innocent and spent 4 years trying to prove it. After watching the interrogation videos, he realized that Chris appeared unaware of important details. Mike Heavey concluded that Chris had been forced to change his story 6 times during 9 interrogations. Although the police recorded all 7 polygraph tests, no one took the time to review the recordings. Mike Heavey, together with a polygraph expert, believed that the polygraph examinations were used to pressure Chris into lying. The police violated protocol during the polygraph test by threatening Chris with a gas chamber, believing that it would not be detected. Mike Heavey reviewed the evidence and concluded that Chris had been manipulated and pressured into confessing to a crime he did not commit. Mike Heavey hoped that the polygraph recordings he discovered would be sufficient to grant Chris Tapp a new trial. In March 2017, Chris Tapp was 1 hearing away from a decision that his attorney believed could lead to his release. However, the sheriff argued that Chris's testimony, combined with the absence of his DNA at the crime scene, did not prove his innocence. The district attorney's office proposed a plea deal. Chris would maintain the charges connected to Angie's death, but the conviction for Angie's abuse would be dismissed. His sentence would be reduced by 10 years, allowing him to be released immediately since he had already served 20 years and would become eligible for parole. Chris Tapp accepted the deal and was released in 2017 after spending 2 decades in prison. After his release, Chris Tapp obtained a job, got married, and began living a normal life. Meanwhile, Carol continued searching for the real criminal. She believed that modern technology would eventually help her solve Angie's case. On May 16, 2019, the sheriff announced that they had arrested a man whose DNA matched the DNA found at the crime scene. Genetic genealogist Cece Moore and her laboratory had made significant progress solving cases through genealogy and public databases. Angie's case became the 56th they solved, and they successfully traced a family tree that identified the real criminal, who was connected to the Usry family. The police secretly collected DNA from the men by following them for several days and searching for discarded items such as cigarette butts, soda cans, or plastic straws. They took DNA samples from all 6 men, but the results were surprising because none of the samples matched the DNA from the crime scene. Police then began investigating the family's children who were not listed in the family tree. They later identified a man named Brian Drips. The police discovered that they had interviewed Brian at the beginning of the investigation into the Angie Dodge case. He lived directly across the street from Angie's house. When Carol Dodge heard this, she exclaimed that it had taken her 23 years to find him and that he had been living right across the street. The first 25 pages of the investigation described the interrogation process. However, the criminal report shows that on the day of the tragedy, a young officer conducted only a brief interview with Brian. He claimed that he knew nothing about the incident and had not heard anything from his neighbor. The police did not ask him to take a DNA test. About 7 weeks after the tragedy, Brian moved from Idaho Falls to a new apartment. Later, police located him and discreetly collected a cigarette filter he discarded near his residence. His DNA matched the DNA found at the crime scene with 100% accuracy. Brian was brought in for questioning and appeared extremely nervous, with his hands shaking. For hours he denied any involvement in Angie's death. However, when police informed him that his DNA had been found at the crime scene, his demeanor changed significantly. Eventually, Brian admitted that he was involved in the case and had acted alone, which meant that Chris Tapp could not have been present. 2 months after Brian's arrest, Chris faced a retrial and was completely exonerated. In October 2020, Chris Tapp filed a lawsuit against the city of Idaho Falls and the Idaho Falls Police Department. The city agreed to pay Chris $1.12 million in compensation for the 20 years he spent in prison before being cleared. Chris acknowledged that no amount of money could compensate for the more than 20 years he spent imprisoned for a crime he did not commit. However, life goes on, and he continues moving forward. In 2021, during the trial, 56-year-old Brian Drips pleaded guilty to the abuse and murder of Angie Dodge. He confessed that he had been drunk and using illegal drugs that night. Brian Drips was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years, meaning he could be released at the age of 76. Moving on to the next case. The case of Chad Amelia. Chad Amelia was born in 1992 in Santa Clara, California, USA. His parents, of Irish descent, married young and later moved to the United States, eager to pursue the American dream, a goal shared by millions. Upon arriving in the United States, they found themselves isolated in a foreign country with no immediate support. Communication with relatives was only possible by phone. Despite the distance, the couple and their children remained determined and did not return to Ireland. Chad grew up with his younger brother, Shane. The two got along well and supported each other from an early age. Following the example of their parents, the challenges they faced shaped their characters, making them kind and fair. Both boys were always ready to assist those in need. Chad, the eldest, was especially hardworking. He played baseball and football in high school, and when a coach noticed his talent, he was offered a spot on the school team. This opportunity fueled his passion for sports, and he became a skilled football player. After graduating from high school, he attended California State University, Chicago, graduating in 2018. Soon afterward, he joined Camarilla, an accounting firm, while continuing his studies in economics to enhance his accounting skills. Known for being sociable and kind, Chad easily connected with people. One spring day in 2018, 20-year-old Chad was walking his dog in the park when he unexpectedly met Bryn Spetcher, a smart, friendly, and determined 27-year-old woman. Like Chad, Bryn was from Chicago, Illinois. She had moved to Washington as she grew older to pursue her education and find a good job. Bryn was born with hearing problems and was nearly deaf from a young age, requiring a hearing aid. This condition made her feel out of place in school, creating various challenges, but it also motivated her to help others and maintain a positive attitude. Despite the difficulties of moving to California, Bryn earned a degree in audiology, a long-sought accomplishment. Her career was just beginning, and she quickly secured a position as an audiologist at a hospital in Los Angeles, aiming to help those facing hearing challenges like herself. Bryn lived in California for about a year, but was not very sociable, often taking time off from work, so she had a limited circle of acquaintances, communicating mainly with a few friends with whom she spent weekends. Chad dramatically changed her life. They began talking and quickly realized they shared many interests. Chad grew very fond of his smart and attractive girlfriend, frequently speaking about her to his friends and expressing his happiness. Bryn also seemed pleased, eagerly sharing stories about him with her friends. They appeared to be the perfect couple, visiting each other often. On May 27, 2018, Bryn went to Chad's house, bringing her beloved service dog, a husky guide dog. Chad also had a dog, and the two animals got along well. The following weekend, about a month later, Bryn planned a business trip to another city and wanted to spend time relaxing with Chad beforehand. Chad lived in the Tarzana Oaks area of California. That evening, one of Chad's neighbors, Vinny, returned home around 2 a.m. He spent about half an hour with Chad and Bryn, who were watching their favorite TV series. Vinny then went to his room to sleep, while another neighbor slept using earplugs and sleeping pills. That night, Bryn and Chad decided to smoke marijuana, which is legal in California, having been legalized in 1996. Chad inhaled a few breaths and quickly relaxed. Bryn, however, initially felt nothing, so she tried again. This time, she experienced severe effects. Her mind went blank, her vision blurred, and she had difficulty breathing. She told Chad, who went to the kitchen to get her some water. She felt so unwell that she feared for her life and asked Chad to stay with her. Chad, experienced with the substance, remained calm and supported her. Bryn later admitted that she thought she was going to die. She began hallucinating about dying in pain and felt she would not survive the night. She became angry at Chad, suspecting he was setting her up, and in her hallucinations, he became the antagonist orchestrating her death through drug use. She also heard voices urging her to kill him, and she concluded that the only way to survive was to eliminate her boyfriend. Suddenly, she stood and went to the kitchen, picking up a large knife. Returning to the living room, she stabbed Chad multiple times in the chest. Voices continued urging her to stab, and she felt unable to resist, overwhelmed by aggression and cruelty she had never experienced before. Each stab brought her a sense of relief amid the hallucinations. Meanwhile, the neighbors were in other rooms on the second floor. One was asleep and heard nothing, while Vinny heard some rustling from downstairs but assumed it was the couple watching TV. After some time, he heard Chad's voice shouting for Bryn to leave him alone and to call for help. The voice became louder and more alarming, frightening Vinny. To investigate, he descended the stairs and first noticed the terrified dogs. Entering the living room, he saw furniture scattered and Bryn holding a bloodied knife. Chad lay on the floor, wheezing, eyes wide with horror, his hands slashed. Bryn continued stabbing him, leaving a large gash across his chest, her face filled with fury. Vinny yelled for her to stop, but she turned toward him with a blank expression, still holding the knife. Fearing for his life, Vinny ran upstairs to warn the second neighbor, who did not respond, being asleep. Vinny then grabbed his phone, ran outside, and called 911. His screams alerted other neighbors, who came out, making Vinny feel safer. He banged on the windows and shouted for Bryn to stop. The neighbors, seeing the chaos inside, also shouted. Inside the apartment, Bryn continued attacking Chad, ignoring the commotion outside. Within minutes, the police arrived and met Vinny, who was sobbing and overwhelmed by the events he had witnessed. He could only point toward the apartment where the violent attack was occurring. The police rushed inside to intervene. In the living room, they found Bryn repeatedly stabbing a young man in the chest. The room was covered in blood, and although the young man showed no signs of life, Bryn did not stop. The officers considered using force to end the attack. However, when they ordered her to drop the knife, Bryn began stabbing herself in the neck. The police quickly deployed a stun gun, which proved ineffective. She continued to harm herself, so the officers used a baton to disarm her. It took 9 strikes to knock the knife from her hand, breaking her arm in several places, yet she seemed completely unaware of her injuries. Only then did Bryn release the knife. In addition to stabbing Chad, she had also stabbed her dog multiple times. When other emergency responders arrived, everyone was shocked by the horrific scene, which resembled a bloodbath. Doctors attempted to resuscitate Vinny, who was in shock and unable to recall or explain what had occurred in the house. The experience profoundly affected him, and he required a long recovery period with psychological support. The dog was treated at a veterinary clinic and eventually recovered. Unfortunately, by the time the police arrived, Chad was already dead. There was a large amount of blood from the stab wounds, and witnesses, neighbors who had come outside after hearing screams, provided statements to police. They could not understand how such a brutal attack could have occurred or what had provoked it. Chad had suffered 108 stab wounds, most concentrated around the heart and neck. Some were superficial and non-lethal, while others penetrated vital organs, making it difficult to determine the exact wound that caused death. He also had multiple self-defense wounds. Bryn, after sustaining self-inflicted injuries to her neck, was rushed to the hospital, where she was intubated and placed on a ventilator. Because of the life support equipment, police initially communicated with her using only paper and pen. Once stabilized, she could communicate fully. Various tests revealed traces of mild substances in her blood. Doctors noted the levels were very low and did not pose a threat to her life or mental health. It was unusual for such a small amount to trigger such an extreme reaction, though doctors did not rule out the possibility that her blood levels had dropped. When Bryn spoke with police, she claimed to remember nothing about the events. She did not know where Chad was or what had happened to him, believing her injuries may have been the result of an assault with intent to rape. In addition to the neck injury, she suffered a broken neck and a bludgeoned arm. The injuries sustained when the police disarmed her. Bryn could not recall the attack and did not believe the police account of her actions. She did not appear to feel remorse for her attack on Chad, refused to comment further, and immediately requested a lawyer, claiming innocence and attributing the incident to drug effects. The last memory she had was being discharged from the hospital after 4 days, on May 31st, when she was immediately arrested for Chad's murder. Eventually, Bryn provided a more detailed account of the tragic night. She had gone to visit Chad with her dog, and they watched TV together. Around 10:30 p.m., when Chad stepped outside to smoke, she joined him, saying she wanted to try it as well. She then began feeling unwell, hallucinating and hearing voices in her head. She had difficulty breathing, felt disoriented and nauseous, and experienced hallucinations blaming Chad for her condition. The hallucinations urged her to kill him, claiming it was the only way to stop her suffering. Though she initially resisted, the hallucinations intensified, making her feel she would die. She attacked Chad with a knife, insisting she had no control at the time and asserting her innocence. When police arrived, the voices in her head directed her to harm herself. She complied, claiming she could not resist because the voices had complete control over her. She could not drop the knife until officers broke her arm. Bryn believed she had suffered drug-induced psychosis. She was eventually charged with first-degree murder, but pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Preliminary hearings took place, and her bail was set at $500,000, which she paid, allowing her to await trial at home. During this period, police continued investigating, and her attorney repeatedly requested adjournments. Chad's murder trial was initially set for October 23, 2023, but a new district attorney took office a month earlier, causing further delays. The trial ultimately began on November 9, 2023. The new prosecutor reduced her charges to manslaughter, shocking the victim's family, who could not comprehend how someone could accidentally stab a person over 100 times. Remarkably, all of this took so long that Chad's mother did not live to see the trial and never witnessed justice, as she passed away in 2020. The court psychiatrist concluded that Bryn suffered from a psychotic disorder triggered by smoking. This conclusion was supported by other experts, and according to the prosecution, there was insufficient evidence to refute it. During the trial, Chad's family insisted that the attack was a deliberate massacre and demanded punishment. The defense argued that Bryn's behavior demonstrated psychosis, noting that she was unaware of her actions when she first stabbed her boyfriend and continued the attack. A police officer using a stun gun could not stop her, and the knife was only removed after 9 baton strikes broke her arm. These actions, the defense argued, indicated psychosis. Bryn, however, stated that she understood what was happening. She remembered everything and claimed she perceived the murder as the only way to survive. She was aware of her actions and made decisions despite experiencing hallucinations. Her attorneys strongly opposed this assertion, leading the defense to repeatedly delay the trial, which lasted 5 years. The central issues were whether she intended to kill Chad and whether she voluntarily used the drug. Under California law, a person can be held responsible for crimes committed under the influence of drugs if it can be proven that use was voluntary. If the drug was coerced, the killing is considered unintentional, and this must be demonstrated. The prosecution presented numerous letters in which Bryn told friends she had been drinking and mentioned occasional smoking, suggesting prior voluntary drug use. They argued that on the day Chad was killed, she voluntarily used the drug as she had before. Many colleagues defended Bryn, describing her as responsible with no criminal history, and no one could testify that she was capable of such a psychotic episode. However, this claim appeared dubious, considering her medical history, which should have made her aware of potential risks. Bryn claimed she was unsure what drugs Chad had smoked and believed he had given them to her intentionally. No other drugs were found in his home. Bryn's parents defended her, asserting she had no romantic relationship with Chad and acted in self-defense against harassment, attempting to portray her as a heroine. Friends on both sides, however, contradicted this claim, stating that Chad and Bryn had been in a relationship for nearly 2 months and were intimate, and everyone knew of it. Chad's relatives denied any allegations of violence, describing him as respectful and noting that although he smoked, a habit his parents advised him to quit, it was legal and had never caused problems. They insisted he was not aggressive and would not have attacked his girlfriend. Throughout the trial, Bryn showed no remorse. The only time she cried was when the brutal details of her arrest were recounted, recalling the intense pain of being struck with a baton. The case was complex, controversial, and attracted significant public attention, with many puzzled as to how a seemingly kind girl dedicated to helping others could commit such a brutal murder. The jury deliberated and ultimately found Bryn Spetcher, 32, guilty of manslaughter. She showed emotion for the second time, covering her face and sobbing, focused solely on her sentence and not on the serious harm she caused. Bryn appeared unwilling to accept responsibility for her actions. Chad's father spoke to reporters, expressing frustration with what he considered an unfair justice system. He highlighted inconsistencies in Bryn's testimony, noting she initially described Chad as a kind, easygoing man, but later admitted fear of him and denied their relationship. He said Bryn tried to blame Chad for the massacre to reduce her sentence and could not believe the court considered it plausible that someone could accidentally inflict over 100 wounds. He emphasized that his son's death was neither simple nor painless, and that the killer was attempting to shift responsibility. During the trial, the prosecution argued that Bryn smoked voluntarily and that Chad never forced her to take drugs against her will. Psychiatric experts, however, confirmed that her psychosis was drug-induced. This was one of the first cases where voluntary drug use was cited to explain psychosis. While awaiting the verdict, Bryn was released on bail. On January 24, 2024, Bryn Spetcher was sentenced to 2 years of probation and ordered to complete 100 hours of community service. The judge justified the lenient sentence by stating that Bryn was not in control during her psychotic episode, making a reduced sentence appropriate. Her attorney applauded the decision, calling it correct. Chad's father, however, was dissatisfied, arguing that the ruling set a dangerous precedent, implying that marijuana users in California might be given a license to kill. Moving on to the next case. The case of Cher Lynn Hughes. Cher Hughes is a businesswoman in her 50s. Her husband, Keith Worrell, is 3 years younger than she is. Both of them are from Florida and quickly fell in love with the tropical region of Bocas del Toro. They decided to relocate to Panama to begin a new life. After living there for 6 months, they bought a piece of land and built a small hotel called Casa del Sapa, which they personally managed. Thanks to the business skills of Cher and Keith, they turned the hotel into a successful venture. But they did not stop there. Using her savings, Cher gradually purchased 4 additional properties in order to expand her business. One day, she excitedly told Keith that she had bought an entire island. She loved the area so much that she simply could not resist. She wanted to continue buying more properties and make it her permanent home. Together, they created the haven of their dreams. Cher and Keith seemed deeply connected and were often referred to as Ken and Barbie because of their harmonious relationship. It appeared that they had a bright and joyful future ahead of them. Sadly, Cher's fate would become tragic. Although she was unable to have children, she always dreamed of becoming a mother. For many years, she underwent treatments and tried tirelessly to conceive, but her efforts were unsuccessful. However, she fulfilled her dream of motherhood by caring for and helping the local children on the island. She regularly bought them school uniforms and supplies, organized themed parties, boat trips, and various fun activities. The children loved her dearly and affectionately called her Mrs. After some time living on the island, Keith and Cher divorced. Keith soon began a new relationship with another woman, who was also an immigrant from the United States. Despite being betrayed, Cher refused to let herself fall apart. Determined to move forward, she repaired her relationship with her sister Judy, with whom she had not spoken much in recent times. To mark this new beginning, Cher planned a small gathering and invited Judy along with a few close friends. The intimate event was meant to help her heal, forget her husband, and find comfort after their divorce. Cher had purchased her sister Judy's ticket a month earlier and was eager to see her again. Judy gladly accepted the invitation and looked forward to the reunion. She missed her younger sister deeply and hoped to repair their relationship. However, as Judy prepared for the trip, Cher suddenly stopped communicating. Over the following days, she did not reply to messages or answer calls. Strangely, new posts appeared on her social media accounts, but they were simply recycled content from earlier times. This behavior seemed unusual and somewhat alarming. Judy tried to discover why Cher was ignoring her, but none of her questions received a response. Cher did not only ignore Judy, but also all of her family members and friends, who had repeatedly tried to contact her. Growing increasingly worried, Judy reached out to Keith. However, he responded coldly and indifferently. He said that he was divorced from Cher, claimed that he had no idea where she was, and made it clear that he had no intention of reconciling with or searching for her. Cher's family found this reaction strange. They began checking her social media pages and contacting people who knew her. Judy sent messages to nearly everyone Cher knew, explaining her disappearance, but no one had any useful information. About 10 days later, they received a message from Cher's account. In the message, Cher said that she was relaxing with a man, but did not reveal his name. She also mentioned that the two of them were planning to go on a cruise. However, this explanation seemed confusing and completely out of character for Cher. Judy's concerns grew stronger. She began to wonder whether something suspicious was hidden behind Cher's seemingly ordinary divorce from Keith. His behavior had been strange, rude, and disrespectful, which made Judy suspect that he might be hiding something. Cher's silence only increased Judy's anxiety. She began to fear that her sister might be in danger or even the victim of a crime. Determined to find answers, Judy contacted one of Cher's friends, Payne Thor, and asked him to help search for her. However, he was unable to find any useful clues. After 2 weeks of searching, he finally reported Cher's disappearance to the police. The case quickly attracted attention because of Judy's frequent activity on social media. In addition, during the 6 months she had lived on the islands building her business, Cher had become well known. She played an important role in the community, helping children and people who were facing difficulties. Hundreds of people were willing to help her family and discover the truth about her disappearance. However, the law enforcement system on the islands was very rudimentary. Despite their good intentions, the police department lacked both the resources and the capacity to investigate the case effectively. They questioned her acquaintances, but assumed that she was simply spending time with friends, or that she had met a new man. When they learned that Cher was supposedly planning to go on a yacht, they accepted this explanation and decided to close the case. Cher's family, who lived more than 2,000 kilometers away, were shocked and desperate. They contacted the U.S. Embassy in Panama in order to pressure the local police to accelerate the investigation. The police then received documents related to the case. Not surprisingly, the primary suspect was Cher's former husband, Keith, who was called in for questioning. He expressed his willingness to supply any information necessary to clear his name as quickly as possible. As the media reported on the case, rumors started spreading. Some people portrayed Keith as a harsh tyrant who mistreated Cher and had been unfaithful to her. Many even believed he might have been involved in her disappearance. They had originally met in Florida in 1993 when she visited the bar that Keith owned. From the very first moment, he felt attracted to her, and she felt the same toward him. After launching her own business, Cher set herself the objective of earning $1 million before moving on to new ventures, and she achieved it. Once she accomplished that goal, she and Keith moved to the islands of Bocas del Toro. They loved the place and chose to settle there. Their relationship became stronger, and in 2005 they held a small wedding ceremony attended by close friends and family. In the timeline surrounding Cher's disappearance, detectives considered it suspicious that she vanished shortly after divorcing Keith. They theorized that the two incidents might be related and suspected that Keith knew more than he was admitting. Nevertheless, he has continually denied any involvement in her disappearance. He stated that they had divorced amicably even though Cher had felt hurt. He maintained that he had no motive to harm her, as he stood to gain nothing from it, with no inheritance or insurance payment involved. Their relationship had already been legally dissolved. He also presented an alibi for the period during which Cher disappeared, but this was complicated because the exact time she went missing remained unclear. Cher lived by herself, and no one was able to determine precisely when she had vanished. The investigation became even more complicated because locals believed that Cher, a kind and well-liked individual, could not possibly have had enemies or conflicts with anyone. However, the police received information from several witnesses stating that she had gone on a cruise with a man before her disappearance. The witnesses did not know the identity of this man. There was also evidence indicating that she had sold all of her belongings to a man called Wild Bill prior to vanishing. This appeared suspicious because she had been waiting for her sister Judy to arrive and had no plans to leave the area. In addition, she had not said goodbye to anyone before she disappeared, which was very unusual for someone who was so connected and friendly with the local community. Wild Bill turned out to be a neighbor and friend of Cher. When questioned, he claimed that she had willingly sold her assets to him because she had fallen in love with a new man and decided to abandon all of her work. His explanation persuaded the detectives. They checked the details and prepared to close the case. However, Cher's family refused to accept this conclusion. They did not know where she was, and she had not contacted them. Unable to travel to Panama themselves, the family requested that the police continue the investigation and sought help from a local journalist named Don Winner. Don Winner, a journalist who worked for a news website serving the expatriate community in Panama, was fluent in both English and Spanish and was experienced in handling complex situations on the islands. He decided to conduct an investigation in order to help the Hughes family pursue justice. When he took on the case, he was given a copy of the police report along with other relevant information. During his investigation, he quickly realized that Cher had no intention of leaving the country. This was puzzling, since a personality like Cher would not have vanished without a trace. As Don continued his investigation, he discovered that Cher was not the only person to disappear in Bocas del Toro. Just 4 months earlier, a 58-year-old antique dealer named Bo Eiler had also vanished under mysterious circumstances. Cher and Bo knew each other. Although their personalities differed, she was outgoing while he was more reserved. The important thing they shared was that both had sold their properties to Wild Bill shortly before they disappeared. Wild later put those properties up for sale. Bo's family believed that he had relocated to Argentina, so they did not actively search for him. However, the disappearance of both Bo and Cher raised fears that a serial killer might be operating on the islands, kidnapping or even murdering people. This possibility created panic and fear within the local community. Don kept investigating and started to suspect that Wild was involved. After Cher disappeared, he frequently held parties at her house, which seemed very unusual. He had not even removed her picture from the wall, which created a disturbing impression. In addition, he hired someone to renovate her house and then sold it for a higher price. Don believed he was moving in the right direction and began collecting more information about Wild Bill. Witnesses reported that he owned a gun, which was illegal in Panama. They said they had seen him carrying it and occasionally heard gunshots. This testimony provided the police with a valid reason to investigate further. Don handed over all the information he had gathered to the police, and they considered the evidence convincing. The police obtained a search warrant for Wild's home. During the search, they uncovered a disturbing collection of Nazi symbols, horror memorabilia, and jars filled with human teeth and crowns. They also discovered a large supply of weapons and ammunition. He appeared to be obsessed with horror movies, possessing a large collection that included recordings of real-life murders found on the dark web. Among the items seized was Cher's handbag, which contained her documents and several credit cards. They also discovered a cell phone and multiple personal belongings belonging to Beau, who had disappeared earlier. However, neither Wild nor his wife were present at the time. Investigators also found Cher's dog at her house. When the police attempted to take the dog away, it repeatedly returned to the house. Each time they took the dog by boat 1 kilometer away from the shore, it jumped off, swam back to land, and ran straight home. Eventually, the dog led them to a specific location in Wild's backyard. They assumed the dog was attempting to indicate something, so they decided to search that area. Meanwhile, workers who had previously renovated Wild's house before it was sold were called in for questioning. One of them revealed that Wild had asked him to dig a hole in the backyard in order to bury his trash. The worker indicated the exact location, and an excavation was scheduled for the following day. During the excavation, investigators uncovered the body of a woman in her 40s. Based on the state of the remains, she had been buried for roughly 3 to 4 months. Dental records confirmed that it was the body of Cher, who had previously gone missing. Beau's body was also discovered in the same pit, but it was in a more advanced stage of decomposition, having been buried for a longer period. A third body was found nearby, but identification proved difficult because the head was missing. The remains appeared one after another, one skeleton after another. In total, 5 bodies were recovered, but the identities of 3 of them still remain unknown. Investigators soon shifted their attention to Wild. They discovered that his real name was William Holbert, a 30-year-old man from North Carolina, USA. In 2007, he moved to the area with his second wife, Laura Michelle Reese. He had a lengthy criminal history and was wanted in 6 states for various crimes. Neighbors described them as loud and irritating. His wife, who introduced herself as Gina Cortez, was regarded as rude and strange. They rarely appeared in public except when they attended parties at bars. Gina claimed to be a veterinarian, but when a neighbor asked her for help with a dog, she was unable to assist. She explained that her specialty was large farm animals, such as horses and cattle. This explanation raised doubts about the truthfulness of her claim. William Holbert, known as Wild, was the only child in his family. His father worked for a company that produced agricultural machinery. He grew up in a beautiful 2-story home, received a good education, and regularly took part in sports. He appeared to have a promising future ahead of him. He married his first wife, Ryan, in 1998 when he was only 18 years old. Within a year, they had their first child. Over the next 4 years, they had 2 additional children. During that time, he worked in design, while his wife stayed at home as a housewife. After his father passed away, Wild and his family moved back into his parents' house and assumed responsibility for managing the family farm. Around that time, neighbors, friends, and relatives began to notice that Wild had become extremely angry. Many believed this might have been caused by his use of steroids, but there were also indications that he suffered from mental health problems. He frequently lost control and assaulted his wife and children. His wife, Ryan, became very worried about these changes, especially when Wild, for unknown reasons, wanted to kill the family's healthy and gentle dog. Despite his objections, his wife took the dog to the veterinarian, but the vet refused. In a burst of rage, he killed the dog in front of his children and disposed of the body. This act shocked and saddened both his family and the neighbors. During this period, Wild's business ventures and his father's farm both failed. He then decided to pursue a career in politics. He purchased several business suits and announced that he would run for mayor. However, his strange and aggressive behavior sparked gossip, and no one took his political ambitions seriously. Despite this, he remained confident and believed he could win. Unfortunately, An incident involving his dog further damaged his reputation and destroyed any hope of a political career. In 2003, Wilde met the Hoover family at a fitness center he frequently visited. He presented himself as a successful businessman and made a strong impression on them. Unaware of Wilde's previous failed ventures, the Hoover family decided to purchase a third gym in 2004 and placed him in charge of it. This was an opportunity for him to demonstrate his abilities, but he managed the gym poorly and failed to purchase the necessary training equipment on time. Instead, he rented an apartment close to the gym, which was only a few minutes' drive from his home. He lived there with his mistress, Laura, while maintaining the appearance of a normal family life with his wife and children. By 2004, Wilde's wife, Ryan, discovered that he was having an affair with Laura, which led to the collapse of his family. Around the same time, he secretly attempted to sell the Hoover family's gym. This became known in 2005 when he filed for bankruptcy. After leaving, he left behind tens of thousands of dollars in unpaid bills, loans, and debts. Although he had a monthly income of about $1,600, he was spending as much as $4,000 each month. Later, his lover Laura opened a Russian-themed bookstore. However, the store also failed very quickly. Wilde lived in Santa Fe for some time and worked on various projects. However, he began to encounter trouble when he was caught selling culturally valuable artifacts that turned out to be stolen. After being arrested, he managed to escape. He and Laura fled from the police in an SUV, driving across fields and along dirt roads. They eventually reached Florida, where they boarded a cruise ship and continued their escape by disembarking in Panama. In Panama, they began a business selling motorcycle parts. He started using the pseudonym Ulf, even though he was one of America's most wanted criminals. At that time, he was about 20 years old. Interestingly, photographs from that period show him completely bald. On the islands, however, he grew his hair long in order to better conceal his identity. During that time, he actively sought advice from lawyers and experts on Panama's legal system, paying special attention to the procedures required to purchase and register real estate. After buying their first house, they converted it into a bar called Private. There, they hosted parties and invited everyone to join them. Wilde and Laura openly promoted their bar, even placing advertisements in the local newspaper. However, neighbors were puzzled about how the bar remained open, since it was clearly not profitable. When asked about his source of income, he simply replied that he was a millionaire and that he worked only for fun. Over time, he began buying and reselling various items. Eventually, it was revealed that he had been murdering people in order to seize their property, which allowed him to accumulate a large amount of money and live a comfortable life. As news of Wilde's dark past spread, many local residents fled from their homes. Some speculated that he might escape by boat, while others believed he could flee by plane. The remote islands made it easier for him to escape, and with his wealth he could hide anywhere across the world. Forensic specialists quickly concluded that both Cher and Beau had been killed by a weapon fired at close range to the head. 3 additional bodies were later identified as members of the Brown family, immigrants from the United States. The family consisted of Mike Brown, his wife, and their school-aged son. They had also interacted with the other victims, Cher and Beau, and all belonged to the same community. Mike owned the house where Wilde lived and operated the bar. When the Brown family vanished, the new owner, Wilde, declared that he had purchased the property from them. As with the other victims, law enforcement handled the case as though the family had willingly departed. The police ended their search as soon as they heard claims that the individuals had simply left or traveled somewhere else. It is important to note that after Mike Brown disappeared, money continued to be withdrawn from his account every day through ATMs. This activity caused the police to believe that he was still alive. Therefore, they did not consider the possibility that he had been abducted. Eventually, the investigation was abandoned altogether. Only when the case was reopened did investigators discover that the withdrawals were connected to a man named Wilde and Laura, who were wanted. The police then began searching for the two of them. A few days later, a police boat intercepted a vessel traveling toward Nicaragua. Among the passengers were Wilde and Laura. They resisted arrest, forcing an officer to use a weapon in order to subdue them. Before their capture, they had been living in a rented house in Costa Rica. One evening, when they saw a wanted advertisement on television, they packed their belongings and attempted to flee. However, someone noticed them and reported their location, which resulted in their detention. After being arrested, they were charged with the murder of 5 people. However, Wilde refused to surrender. At first, he insisted on his innocence, but when the evidence against him became overwhelming, he changed his account. He suddenly claimed that Keith owed him $1.45. This statement was clearly false, since Keith barely knew him. Furthermore, there was no logical reason for him to murder Cher and the other neighbors on the island. Keith eventually decided to cooperate with the investigation, which played a crucial role in uncovering the truth behind the case. However, he feared that his testimony might be interpreted as complicity. He faced the possibility of ending up in prison alongside Wilde, but Wilde later admitted that he had framed Keith and that Keith had nothing to do with the murders. Wilde eventually confessed that he had killed not only Beau and Cher, but also the Brown family. He explained in detail how he had murdered them in several different locations. Thus, during the 4 years he had lived on the island, he had killed a total of 5 people. According to Wilde's testimony, he invited Cher to dinner in order to discuss buying her property. She agreed to the meeting, but later that evening he lured her to the backyard and struck the back of her head from close range. He then placed her body on an ATV, drove it to a dump on his property, and concealed it in a hole that had already been dug. He covered the body with dirt and instructed the workers to bury it carefully while they were completely unaware that they were assisting in a crime. He used a similar method to hide the evidence of his other murders. His motive was simple greed. He wanted to take their property for himself and was willing to kill in order to achieve that goal. One day, Wilde got into a fight with another American immigrant and killed the man. Afterwards, he casually buried the body. During a conversation, he expressed regret and sorrow for his actions. However, Laura consistently denied any involvement in the crime. She claimed that she knew nothing about what he had done and insisted that she had played no role in it. This statement was difficult to believe. As a result, she was charged with complicity. 11 days after her body was discovered, Cher's friends and family held a funeral for her. She was buried on the island of Bocas del Toro, which she had considered her paradise and her final resting place. The farewell ceremony took place at the highest point of the island, where her ashes were placed in a small hole and a memorial tribute was placed on a tree to honor her. Prosecutors requested life sentences for both William and Laura. However, the legal process in Panama moved very slowly. Even so, the prosecutor insisted that they would show no leniency toward the killers. William Holbert, also known as Wild Bill, confessed his guilt in court. He was sentenced to 47 years in a local prison, and Laura Michelle Reese received a sentence of 26 years for being an accessory, even though she did not admit to helping her husband. In court, neither of them showed any remorse. After being imprisoned, they divorced. Despite their imprisonment, they did not appear very upset. In 2015, Laura remarried Sadovnikov. While serving his sentence, Wilde established a church that received official recognition from the Panama Prison Service. He proudly referred to himself as the advisor of this religious organization and began representing Panama in defending the rights of individuals who were serving prison sentences. Moving on to the next case. Christopher Panayotou. Port Elizabeth is renowned for its stunning coastal attractions, which attract both domestic and international visitors. The city also boasts numerous shopping centers and bars. Moreover, it is distinctive within South Africa for its rich wildlife, where one can encounter some of the nation's largest animals, including the whale shark, leopard, lion, buffalo, rhinoceros, and elephant. In 2004, an 18-year-old named Christopher Panayotou resided in Port Elizabeth after completing his schooling. Eager to apply his business acumen, he looked for opportunities within his father's business, which included several stores across the city, such as Bambi's Diner on Market Street. Christopher was recognized as a diligent worker with a strong business sense. At a friend's party, Christopher met an attractive girl named Jade, who was also 18. They conversed and quickly began dating, eventually falling in love. Jade was cheerful and kind-hearted, aspiring to become a teacher. In 2005, she enrolled in university, and over the following years, their relationship strengthened as they learned more about each other's ambitions. While Jade concentrated on her studies, Christopher launched his first business, a local grocery store in Algoa Park, followed by a second venture, a restaurant and cocktail bar named Infinity, situated nearby. By 2011, the couple seemed more serious. Jade graduated and secured a position at a local elementary school, while Christopher's businesses prospered. Eventually, Christopher proposed to Jade, and they became officially engaged and moved in together. Sadly, their happiness was short-lived, as Christopher engaged in an affair at his store, which Jade remained unaware of. 2 years before these developments, Christopher had employed a young woman named Chanel Coutts. Initially, their interaction was strictly professional, but by 2012, everything shifted. Christopher and Chanel began a clandestine affair. Soon, their colleagues noticed unusual signs of affection between them. The pair spent nights together in local hotels, and whenever Jade was away, Christopher would invite Chanel to his home. It remains uncertain how long this affair might have persisted, but Christopher's father, Konstantinos Panotu, eventually discovered the situation. Konstantinos was enraged, as he had regarded Jade as a future daughter-in-law. Over the 8 years he had known her, Konstantinos had come to admire Jade's dedication, hard work, and kindness, recognizing her potential. Consequently, Konstantinos threatened to disinherit Christopher if he did not end the affair or leave Jade for Chanel. As a prosperous businessman in Port Elizabeth, Konstantinos intended for his business to be passed to Christopher, who was still establishing his career. Following a heated conversation with his father, Christopher promised to cease his involvement with Chanel, but he failed to follow through, and their affair intensified. During this period, Jade remained completely unaware of the ongoing situation. Eventually, Christopher and Jade married officially in 2012, becoming Mr. and Mrs. Panotu. They appeared to be a beautiful couple admired by many, but circumstances soon altered their lives dramatically. Jade received wonderful news, securing a teaching position at a nearby college, while Christopher's business struggled. Revenues at his store and restaurant declined, with financial indicators remaining in the red for several months. This made it challenging for him to support both women in his life. He spent heavily on luxurious gifts for Chanel, financed hotel stays, and even purchased presents for his mistress's best friend to ensure her silence regarding their relationship. These substantial expenses affected his bank account, compelling him to work longer hours to sustain his lifestyle. From 2015 onward, Christopher became increasingly distant from his wife, Jade. Business consumed most of his time and energy as he endeavored to stabilize it. He always found reasons to remain at his store and focused intensely on work. Jade gradually realized she was experiencing loneliness. Her husband devoted little time to her. When she spoke with friends, she mentioned how seldom she saw Christopher, and when he was home, he appeared preoccupied with other thoughts. Jade attempted to encourage him to dine at home, and she even visited the store to spend time together, but these efforts proved insufficient. By September 2014, she recognized that her emotional control was faltering and that she was approaching a breakdown. On September 21st, Jade wrote a letter to herself articulating her feelings. In it, she expressed her longing for love and for a husband who would prioritize and care for her. She questioned why happiness eluded her and why Christopher seemed to conceal so much, complicating communication. She felt as though her heart had been taken or shattered. Writing this letter enabled her to realize the depth of her love for Christopher and how much she desired to spend time with him. Those close to Jade noticed her growing loneliness. One day, a best friend was asked by Christopher for ideas for a birthday gift. She suggested that Jade only wished to spend quality time with him. He acknowledged the issues in his relationship with Jade, yet he remained focused on his business and was also distracted by thoughts of another woman. On April 21st, 2015, Jade disappeared. It was a Tuesday, a normal working day for her, and she was expected at the college, which was 40 minutes away by car from her home in Wall Glen. Normally, Jade would carpool with her friend and colleague, Sherry, and that day was supposed to be no different. Jade left her house at 6:15 a.m. to wait for her friend. However, when Sherry arrived, Jade was not there. Her phone went unanswered, and no one responded to the doorbell. Concerned, Sherry called the police. By 10 a.m., a missing person notice was shared on social media, and numerous news outlets began reporting the incident. The police initiated a large-scale search the same day, deploying multiple teams and canine units. Despite this, by sunset, they had no leads regarding Jade's whereabouts. In response, her family offered a reward of 50,000 rand for any information leading to her discovery, which increased to 150,000 rand by nightfall. As volunteers and concerned citizens intensified the search, tragic news emerged at 10 a.m. A police officer reported that with the assistance of his canine unit, he had found a body in an overgrown area near a gravel road, not far from Quanah Bush. Forensic experts quickly confirmed the body belonged to Jade. She was fully clothed and had suffered forced attack wounds, 2 to the back and 1 to the head. Her bank cards and jewelry were missing. Relatives were deeply grieved by the news, and friends and family openly wept. Jade's sister nearly fainted upon hearing the news. Christopher was present at the time. Students and colleagues mourned the loss of their kind and caring teacher. The heartbreak resonated throughout South Africa and was widely shared on social media. However, one of the most critical questions regarding Jade's death remained unanswered. Why did Jade have to die? There seemed to be no obvious motive for her murder. The following day, police released 2 surveillance images and discovered that on the day of Jade's death, her bank cards had been used at 2 separate locations. The cameras captured 2 images, but none of Jade's relatives recognized the individuals pictured. A week later, family and friends gathered for Jade's funeral at a Catholic church in Newton Park. Many attended to share their grief and bid farewell, including numerous students and all of her relatives. Everyone was moved by the heartfelt tributes to Jade, the late wife of Christopher. Meanwhile, Christopher's display of grief appeared unusual and insincere. Investigators discovered that his expressions of sorrow had been carefully rehearsed. They believed Christopher had searched online for a farewell speech and found a dedication by Charles Atkins to his own late wife, with which his speech shared many similarities. While appropriating another person's speech was improper, it did not necessarily indicate guilt. He was simply struggling to convey genuine emotions. Simultaneously, other troubling developments were unfolding. One day before the funeral, police arrested a man named Sion in connection with Jade's murder. Sion was identified as a bouncer at Christopher's nightclub. Rumors circulated that Sion either orchestrated the crime or confessed while in custody. Another rumor suggested he claimed that Christopher had instructed him to hire a hitman to kill Jade. Although Sion would not have carried out the crime himself, he allegedly knew a few acquaintances who might comply with such a request. This represented a significant breakthrough in the investigation, yet there remained no evidence directly linking Christopher to the crime. The police required more than rumors to substantiate such a serious accusation. To obtain additional evidence, authorities devised a plan to release Sion from custody on the condition that he speak with Christopher, recording any confessions concerning Jade's murder. In return, the police promised to reduce Sion's sentence and negotiate other matters. The following day, Sion contacted Christopher, and their conversation enabled the police to draw crucial conclusions. Christopher was arrested 2 hours after the call. Following this, 3 additional suspects were apprehended. While Christopher denied any involvement in his wife's death, the investigation revealed that he had instructed his nightclub bodyguard to arrange the murder. Sion then recruited 3 hitmen for the task. Christopher directed them to carry out the plan early in the morning at 6:30 a.m., while Jade waited for a co-worker who was supposed to drive her to work. He intended to stage the killing as a robbery at the Glenwalls gates, planning to steal all her possessions. The execution date was initially set for April 20th, 2015. However, while the hired killers were preparing to carry out the order, one of their girlfriends arrived, prompting them to postpone the operation. This delay frustrated Christopher, who demanded the murder take place as soon as possible. Consequently, the following day was scheduled. On April 21st, Jade arrived outside her village at 6:15 a.m., where 3 killers were already waiting in a rented car a short distance away. They opted not to kill her immediately due to concerns about potential witnesses and decided to abduct her to another location to carry out the murder. Jade was placed in the back seat of the car, which drove northwest from the village for approximately 30 minutes. Upon arrival, the killers pulled her from the car and attacked her 3 times with force. She died from the 3rd gunshot. One of the criminals then went to a nearby ATM and withdrew 1,000 rand, roughly equivalent to $100. Later that same day, they attempted another cash withdrawal, but the transaction failed due to an incorrect PIN. Both attempts were captured on surveillance cameras. The magistrate's court planned to try all 4 criminals together, excluding the bouncer Sione, who had already faced a separate punishment. Mysteriously, before the trial commenced, one of the hitmen died, leaving the remaining 2 and Christopher to face charges for the crime. On October 11, 2015, the the trial against Christopher and the two mercenaries began. The prosecution argued that Christopher murdered Jade because he could not afford to support both his wife and his mistress, leading him to want her removed from the picture. In contrast, Christopher's defense maintained that he had a kind heart and would never commit such an act, particularly since he had recently purchased a new house for himself and Jade. They asserted that Christopher had no motive to kill his wife. Christopher's mistress, Chanel, testified about the expensive gifts he had given her and confirmed that she had spent the night with him in the penthouse while Jade was away. Evidence was also presented showing their illicit encounters at local hotels. The prosecution introduced various pieces of evidence, including phone calls between the hired killers and Christopher's bouncers, ATM photos, GPS data, hidden vehicles, and other incriminating materials. On November 2, 2017, when he turned 31, Christopher Panotu was found guilty of murdering his wife. Investigations revealed that he had sought a loan of 2.5 million rand, which he had no intention of using for his wife or mistress. The judge concluded that Christopher had come to regret his marriage to Jade, so he killed her to reduce expenses and curb his mounting debt. Due to the cruelty of his actions, the judge sentenced Christopher to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The two hired killers also received life sentences, while Sione awaited his own sentence. Unfortunately, Lithando Sione's testimony had been hostile. Following a series of trials, Sione was convicted by the Kebra High Court on November 25, 2021, and sentenced to life imprisonment on November 26, 2021. The story ultimately highlights themes of betrayal and greed. Jade was a truly good person with a heart of gold. She was dedicated to her cause and the people around her, always maintaining a positive attitude, a vibrant personality, and a beautiful smile. She deserved far more in life than what her husband took from her. On December 9, 2019, Christopher's father, who had opposed his son's affair with Chanel, tragically lost his life. He was shot multiple times near his store while closing for the night, and his car was stolen. The murder of Christopher Panotu overshadowed previous events and devastated two families. This tragedy stemmed from the actions of a selfish man who placed pride and money above his wife's life. It remains uncertain whether he bears responsibility for his father's death. Society hopes that Christopher will spend the remainder of his life in prison, filled with regret and despair. Moving on to the next case. The case of Lawrence Rudolph. Lawrence and Bianca met while attending the University of Pittsburgh. After completing their studies, they married in 1982. Lawrence, who was known to his friends as Larry, later established his own dental practice, with his wife serving as his personal assistant. The couple soon had two children, Julian and Anna Bianca. After their children were born, Bianca decided to step away from her role at the dental practice in order to focus on managing the household. Lawrence's career progressed rapidly. He partnered with others to open a large dental practice, which proved highly lucrative. Following this success, he developed a new hobby, hunting. However, this was not ordinary hunting for foxes or deer in nearby forests. Instead, he often traveled to Africa. His favorite destination was Kafue National Park, the second largest of its kind in Africa, located in southern Zambia. The reserve, while providing a natural habitat for wildlife, also featured a designated area specifically for hunting. Initially, Bianca was reluctant to accompany her husband on these hunting trips. Her intention in going was to explore Africa rather than to hunt herself. She was drawn to the richness of the landscapes, the people, and the culture. Over time, she attended more frequently and mastered most aspects of the hobby, eventually becoming a seasoned hunter. Later, Lawrence joined the International Club of Safari Hunting Enthusiasts and even served as its president. During his trips, he filmed short videos focused on hunting and presented them at numerous club events. In 2006, during one expedition in Africa, he was attacked by a crocodile, which bit his arm, narrowly avoiding amputation. His life and health were insured, and following the incident, the insurance company paid him a substantial monthly sum, totaling approximately $3 million. Lawrence subsequently ended his business partnership with his associates and founded his own chain of dental clinics called Three Rivers Dental. The first clinic opened in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, specializing in sedation dentistry. Over time, he expanded to 5 additional branches, with the business rapidly achieving financial success, providing a large income that allowed his family to maintain a prosperous lifestyle, including regular hunting trips abroad. However, beneath this outwardly successful appearance, darker aspects of Lawrence's life emerged. Despite his career achievements, happy family, and luxurious home, he had an affair with Lori Millerine, an attractive blonde whom he had hired as a dental hygienist. Coworkers noted that Lawrence made no attempt to conceal the relationship. He and Lori often locked themselves in his office and frequently arrived together in the same car. Lori benefited significantly from the affair. Before meeting Lawrence, she had been in debt and lived modestly. After becoming involved with the wealthy Lawrence, her lifestyle changed dramatically. She could purchase designer clothes, dine at upscale restaurants, and indulge in luxuries freely. Lawrence even gifted her a brand new sports car. Bianca, his wife, was aware of the affair but felt powerless to stop it. It was rumored that the affair led to Lawrence losing his position as president of the Hunt Club. He filed a lawsuit against the organization but ultimately failed to reclaim his position or protect his rights. The Lawrence family eventually relocated to Phoenix, Arizona, though Lawrence still frequently traveled between Arizona and Pennsylvania due to the location of his dental offices. As for their children, Bianca, their daughter, chose to follow in her father's footsteps, working part-time at one of his dental clinics, while their son Julian pursued a career in law. In 2016, Lawrence and Bianca planned another hunting trip to Kafue National Park with the goal of hunting a leopard, a long-held ambition that Lawrence had yet to achieve despite numerous prior trips. On September 27, 2016, they traveled to Zambia for a 15-day vacation. Upon arrival, they met with a group of locals, including a guide named Spencer Kakoma, who would accompany them during the hunt. Lawrence and Bianca stayed in a small but comfortable hut equipped for a pleasant stay. Over the following days, they ventured armed into the national park's hunting grounds multiple times. According to Spencer, Bianca successfully hunted several animals, including hippos, wild boars, and zebras. On the final day of the hunt, Lawrence realized he had failed to secure a leopard. Perhaps due to this, he suggested to Bianca that they extend the trip for a few more days to continue hunting. Bianca, however, opposed the idea, needing to return home for her nephew's wedding scheduled for October 11, 2016. Meanwhile, Spencer and the staff were loading their belongings into a vehicle when Bianca's scream rang out from the tent, followed by a gunshot. Spencer ran immediately to the tent, where he found Bianca lying on her back with a severe chest wound that was still bleeding. Kneeling beside her was Lawrence, visibly distraught. A weapon remained in a case nearby. Shocked, Spencer cautiously approached Lawrence, attempting to separate him from Bianca and the weapon. Lawrence, overcome with grief, pleaded with Spencer to let him end his own life, explaining that he had been showering when he heard the explosion. He rushed to Bianca and found her unconscious on the floor. After Spencer confiscated all firearms, Lawrence left the hut and walked down to the riverbank, an area known to be infested with alligators, screaming that he wanted to end his life. Spencer eventually calmed him and escorted him back to the cabin, during which Lawrence repeatedly lamented, "My wife is no more. She is dead." Once Lawrence regained some composure, Spencer took him to the police station, where he provided his testimony regarding the events. The police chief subsequently dispatched an investigation team to the scene. After inspecting the hut, investigators concluded that Lawrence's account aligned with the evidence and ruled that the incident resulted from Bianca's self-harm. According to police reports, she had accidentally injured herself while attempting to return the weapon to its case. A forensic examination conducted by Zambian authorities confirmed that Bianca had suffered severe damage to her heart and left lung caused by a 1.2 millimeter bullet wound. At this stage, the investigation appeared ready to be closed. However, according to Spencer, many suspicious elements remained regarding Bianca's death. Lawrence had claimed that he had been in the shower at the time of the gunshot. Yet, when Spencer entered the hut, Lawrence was fully dressed. His shirt was tucked into his pants, and he wore a belt and boots. Spencer, an experienced guide, confirmed that the weapon could not have fired accidentally, nor could it have been loaded by mistake. He also personally verified that all weapons belonging to the group, including Lawrence's, were unloaded as part of strict safety measures followed by every expedition participant. Despite these doubts, Spencer mentioned that during the trip he had noticed nothing unusual in Lawrence and Bianca's behavior. On the contrary, they appeared happy together, frequently hugging and showing affection openly, with no visible signs of tension or conflict. After returning home, Lawrence behaved strangely. He did not inform his children about Bianca's death until a week later and withheld all details. Bianca and Julian were both shocked, and their young sister struggled to comprehend the news. Other family members experienced similar distress. Bianca was particularly surprised by Lawrence's insistence on cremating her mother. To carry out the plan, Lawrence had to contact the U.S. Embassy in Zambia. His actions raised suspicion, as arranging a cremation and transporting Bianca's remains back to the United States required notification of the U.S. government. At that time, the chief consular officer at the embassy, a former military officer skilled in identifying injury specifics, found Lawrence's suggestion to cremate Bianca unusual. He decided to examine her remains before granting the necessary transport permits. He personally went to the morgue, meticulously studied the wounds, took measurements, and recorded his observations on video. Further doubts emerged when one of Bianca's friends contacted FBI agents stationed in Africa. The friend also questioned Lawrence's insistence on cremation, noting that Bianca was a devout Christian who opposed such practices. She expressed additional suspicions about the circumstances of Bianca's death, including Lawrence's affair. Despite this, Lawrence proceeded with his plan. On October 22, 2016, Bianca's funeral was held. The ceremony surprised many attendees. Although she was a Christian, it lacked the traditional elements of a religious funeral and was notably simple. When asked about Bianca's death, Lawrence claimed she had accidentally injured herself with a weapon, repeating the same explanation in the insurance report. Lawrence and Bianca held multiple insurance policies from different companies, covering minor damages as well as accidental or natural death. These policies later attracted the attention of federal investigators. The FBI's investigation revealed that Bianca had 9 insurance policies from 7 different companies. Following her death, Lawrence received nearly $5 million in payouts, which were deposited into his bank accounts. By this time, he had returned to his normal life, continuing to operate his dental practice and openly maintaining his relationship with his mistress, Lori. He even took Lori to the house he had shared with Bianca. Soon afterward, he purchased a plot of land worth approximately $1.35 million and began constructing a new mansion. While it seemed that he had deceived everyone, federal agents had quietly opened an investigation and were methodically gathering evidence to clarify the case. A key piece of evidence was a recorded phone conversation between Lori and Lawrence, in which Lori issued Lawrence an ultimatum, giving him 1 year to leave his wife. Additionally, investigators from the United States and Zambia conducted numerous interviews with individuals who knew the Lawrence family and who had been present at the scene. Witness testimony indicated that Lawrence could appear cheerful and friendly, but could abruptly shift to a grumpy, aggressive demeanor. Investigators also re-interviewed Spencer, who had previously expressed doubts about Lawrence's account. During this conversation, he reiterated that all weapons had been unloaded the day before the incident and highlighted inconsistencies between Lawrence's actions and his testimony. Spencer also confirmed observing Lawrence fully dressed, despite Lawrence's claim that he had been taking a shower. Furthermore, the actions of the head of the local police department, where Lawrence was taken, aroused suspicion. The sheriff appeared to accept Lawrence's account, and the investigation recorded only basic details, such as seizing Bianca's body and performing a forensic examination. By this time, FBI agents had already reviewed numerous documents related to the case and examined photographs of Bianca's wound, which had been taken by an employee of the U.S. Embassy. During discussions with this employee, the agents learned that Lawrence had become enraged upon discovering that the body had been examined and photographed. Later, the agents conducted their own study, focusing on women whose physical characteristics closely matched Bianca's, in order to determine whether she could have inflicted the chest wound herself with a weapon. The shotgun's trigger was located approximately 79 centimeters from the muzzle, while Bianca's arm span did not exceed 73 centimeters. Tests with 15 women of similar build showed that none could reach the trigger while holding the barrel against their chest. Ballistics experts conducted drop tests to assess whether the weapon could have discharged accidentally, such as if it fell while Bianca was placing it in the case. They dropped similar firearms from slightly over 1 meter onto the floor dozens of times, but in no instance did the weapon discharge on its own. Analysis of Bianca's wound led to a critical conclusion. If she had inflicted it herself, there would have been a single hole matching the barrel's diameter, because the bullets would not have had sufficient time or distance to disperse. However, the photographs revealed multiple bullet holes surrounding the main wound, indicating that the weapon had been discharged from a distance of at least 60 centimeters to 1 meter. This evidence strongly suggested that Bianca's death was not accidental and intensified suspicions regarding Lawrence, particularly in light of the substantial financial gains he had received from insurance payouts. Approximately 5 years after Bianca's death, Lawrence's dental business continued to prosper, and he and Lori enjoyed a lavish lifestyle. They relocated to Phoenix, Arizona, and frequently vacationed at their home in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. In late December 2021, Mexican authorities detained Lawrence at the Cabo San Lucas airport under an international arrest warrant. A few days later, he was extradited to the United States, specifically to Denver, Colorado, where the headquarters of the insurance company he allegedly defrauded was located. Lori also returned to the U.S. During the trial, a jury was convened to evaluate the evidence against Lawrence and determine his punishment. Lori was shocked by the developments but maintained her desire to support him, and she was soon called to testify. Lawrence and Bianca's children were in deep grief, stunned by the news of their father's arrest, unable to imagine that he could be accused of murdering their mother. The prosecution presented key evidence gathered during a lengthy international investigation. Lawrence's defense attorneys argued that a financial motive was implausible, emphasizing that his chain of clinics, valued at approximately $1.8 million, provided him no reason to act for monetary gain. They also noted that all insurance companies had already paid out, suggesting Bianca's death was accidental. Representatives from the insurance companies had visited Zambia to conduct their own investigations and concluded that the death occurred unintentionally. However, the prosecution presented more compelling evidence than the insurance investigators and argued that the case involved more than just financial gain. 2 weeks after Lawrence's arrest, the jury determined that the prosecution had proven his involvement in Bianca's murder. In February 2022, Lori Molliran was formally charged and arrested for multiple federal offenses. She was accused of lying to the grand jury and providing false information about the nature of her relationship with Lawrence. Additional testimony came from Brian, a bartender at a restaurant they frequented, who overheard a conversation in which Lawrence allegedly admitted killing Bianca. Based on this evidence, Lori was placed under house arrest and could only contact Lawrence with official authorization. The prosecution argued that Lawrence and Lori should be tried together so the jury could evaluate their relationship and determine whether they jointly decided to kill Bianca. The jury reconvened on July 11, 2022, and deliberated for several weeks. Lawrence's defense continued to insist that he had no motive for murder, citing his strong financial position and the fact that Bianca knew about his affair. The prosecution argued that Lori had pressured Lawrence into committing the crime, believing he still enjoyed life with Bianca and that a divorce would force him to split assets. Additional evidence came from the testimony of Guide Spencer, who stated that Lawrence had attempted to bribe Zambian officials to expedite Bianca's cremation and the return of her remains. The prosecution also highlighted how Lawrence had quickly moved to cash in on the insurance policies. Forensic evidence demonstrated that Bianca could not have reached the shotgun's trigger herself, and experts ruled out accidental discharge. Crucially, the nature of Bianca's injuries, severe damage to the 7th through 9th ribs on her left side, indicated that the weapon struck her from a distance of 60 centimeters to 1 meter. This evidence further refuted the claim that she inflicted the injury on herself. Witness statements from people Lawrence considered friends corroborated that he had repeatedly expressed a desire to divorce Bianca, but refrained because it would require dividing their $1.27 million property. Some participants also speculated that Bianca may have suspected Lawrence intended to harm her during the trip, a suspicion partially supported by testimony from an employee at one of Lawrence's dental clinics. The unnamed employee revealed that shortly before the incident, Lawrence had mentioned a new sedative that would be included in the next shipment of drugs. He stated that the medication was not intended for use in the clinic and requested that it be delivered directly to him, as he planned to take it on the trip. The prosecution considered this detail significant evidence indicating that Lawrence had committed the crime with intent. Conversely, Lawrence's defense team argued that the prosecution's claims were purely speculative and insisted that only the investigation conducted by Zambian authorities could be trusted. Once the trial concluded, the jury deliberated privately to determine the sentences for Lawrence and Lori. After their discussions, the jury returned guilty verdicts. Lawrence Rudolph was convicted of murdering Bianca and defrauding insurance companies. Lori Maliron was found guilty as an accessory to murder, as well as for obstructing justice and committing perjury on 2 separate occasions. The trial established that she had knowingly provided false testimony to mislead the court, repeatedly denying any knowledge of the murder. The judge stated that Lawrence could face life in prison, while Lori could face up to 35 years. However, neither had been formally sentenced immediately, as the verdict was delayed while the defense appealed and requested a new trial. The court denied this request in mid-April 2023. On June 23, 2023, Lori Maliron was sentenced to 17 years in prison and fined $250,000. Judge William J. Martinez determined that a severe sentence was appropriate based on evidence showing that Lori had encouraged the crime and displayed no remorse throughout the trial. During the proceedings, Bianca's daughter, Anna Bianca, confronted Lori and accused her of causing harm to her mother. Lawrence Rudolph was sentenced to life imprisonment on August 21, 2023, for the murder of his wife, Bianca Rudolph, during the 2016 hunting trip in Zambia. In addition to the prison sentence, he was fined over $1.15 million and ordered to forfeit assets related to the case. Their son, Julian Rudolph, initially believed his father, Lawrence, was innocent. However, after reviewing the trial evidence, he changed his opinion and now rarely communicates with his father. Following the verdict, reporters interviewed Lawrence's lawyers, who continued to maintain their client's innocence and insisted that the incident had been accidental. This perspective was also supported by several members of the Zambian police. Lawrence's legal team expressed surprise that the federal government had decided to take over the case and conduct a secret investigation. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.